Welcome back. So now you should have a really good understanding of the use of VACOG and how it really does draw a client deeper into an associated state. So they feel like they're really there as they're listening to you, telling them about these metaphors or these stories or take them on various journeys. So hopefully you've completed the last exercise, which was to write a short paragraph telling your client to walk along a beach and using as much VACOG as possible. Next thing we're going to look at is generalizing and how we generalize and why it's so important. So really, generalizing keeps your client in a trance state, and it also allows them to build up some new belief systems as well. So the way we generalize, and we generalize a lot in our language, and that's why language is so efficient for us to communicate, is because we do generalize. And for those of you that have seen me live, I typically do this on stage, where I sort of talk about things like a stool. And I sort of say to people, what's this? And people sort of say, oh, it's a stool or it's a chair. And so they generalize. They generalize and say, well, you sit on it, so it must be a chair. Or, you know what, you sit on it, so it must be a chair. But then being a little bit more specific and said, well, it's a little bit higher than what I'm sitting on, and I'm sitting on a chair, so it must be a stool. But we still generalize. If we didn't generalize, the way we describe it would just be too inefficient. It'd be something like, it's a black thing with a black wooden seat with a black wooden back and these black plastic looking feet, these two metal struts that are pinned together. So it just becomes too inefficient to talk without using generalizing. And so where that does work for us, and we typically do that unconsciously even without knowing, there are times where we will want to do it more consciously, and that's where we want to create some empowering beliefs or draw some similarities or actually mention some truisms. And what I mean by that is, I guess the reason why we use generalizing so often within hypnosis scripts is it allows the client to then place more meaning into the script itself or into the metaphors without us having to be too specific about things. And so what I mean by that is we don't necessarily know the full details of most people's lives. It's just not feasible for us to sit down and interview someone with so much detail that we can then sort of regurgitate it back to them. And so we generalize in a way that allows our clients to fill in the blanks. And so the way that they receive a story or the way they receive the script or a metaphor, they feel like it's been delivered directly for them. They feel like it's been tailored directly to them. And that's really the artistic way of being able to deliver a metaphor, is you deliver it with enough generalizing terms in there that the client actually believes and fills in the blanks in a way that they think that it was the perfect story for them to hear. Now, the reason why we do generalize so much is for a few reasons. One is that it does create the client, or it keeps the client in a trance-like state. So the more generalizing we use, the more the client needs to try and find meaning to place on it and therefore keep themselves in a trance-like state. Secondly, it also allows them to place the meaning on it themselves, and therefore it feels like something that they're more deeply associated to. And then the third reason why we use so much generalizing terms is to keep our client associated, because we don't want to mention certain things that our client wouldn't necessarily believe in or wouldn't find as a truism, that it wouldn't actually happen within their life. And to give you an example of that, there's a part of the hypnotherapy program that we teach people, and you're going to ask someone to go to their house and grab a lemon and cut it open and then bite into that lemon. And the way that you tell that story is you generalize, because we don't know people's house. We don't know whether they walk in the front door or the back door. So we generalize even at the start by saying you go home through the door. We're not as specific to say the front door or the back door, because you don't know whether some people go home through the back door or the front door. And so that's an example of where we generalize. And so we say you go home through the door. And most people have a door to their home. And so you're fairly safe with that. But anytime you generalize, you are still making a judgment call as to, I'm going to generalize this much, and I'm going to hope that most people are going to be able to fit within that. So again, what is a generalization? And so a generalization will keep your client associated to the script. And so some generalizations you can use are common beliefs, things that most people would believe in, such as you walk along the beach to the water. Most people believe that a beach would lead to water. And so you're going to use some common beliefs, common perceptions, even some truisms, or even generalized references to keep our client associated to the story or to the script as much as possible. You'll even use things such as the stomach or the hands as opposed to your hands. And again, that just keeps a level of generalization within the script to keep our client in that trance-like state. So some things to avoid is you want to avoid being too specific. And so, again, you don't want to use details that are overly specific, especially if you're talking about situations or experiences that the client has actually been on before. Now, again, you're not necessarily going to know that, especially if you're writing a hypnotherapy script, because you don't know whether it's going to be used with hundreds or thousands of people. And so you just can't predict what those hundreds of people's experience is going to be like. However, what you can do is you can start to frame up your story or your script in a way where you might be able to talk about a tropical island, for example. And so as long as you're using generalized terms that fit within people's expectation of what would happen on a tropical island, then you'll get away with that. And so you'll get away with that level of generalization. You'll keep your client deeply associated to it. However, if you bring something different into it, well, then you still can do so, but you just need to frame it up in a way. You need to frame it up as though this is a unusual tropical island. Because sometimes if you bring in something that's a bit of a surprise, it can reduce some of the trance-like state and reduce the generic feel that you're giving your script or your story. Now that you have an understanding of how to generalize, what I want you to do now is put it into practice. So the next exercise I'm going to ask you to do is to write a paragraph using generalized terms, even beliefs or perceptions about your client coming home. So I want you to write a brief paragraph about your client coming home. They walk to the kitchen, they get a lemon out of the fridge, they cut it in half, and then they bite into that lemon. And I want you to use as much VACOG, but use generalized terms when guiding your client through this. And again, no more than 300 words, but I want you to spend at least 5 minutes writing a brief paragraph using generalized terms where you're going to talk to your client as though they're coming home, they walk to the kitchen, they get a lemon out of the fridge, they cut it in half, and they finally bite into it. And I want you to now start to combine the skills that you're learning. And I want you to use VACOG with the generalizing terms. So I want you to bring in VACOG now. So what would happen as someone walks home? As they walk through the door to their home, they see all the things. So seeing, meaning VACOG, and things being a generic term. And so, again, I don't know what your home is like, but if I say you see all the things you normally see, well, then you start to see all those things that you normally see. Whether your house, as soon as you get inside, it's yellow or blue or green, whatever it is. But as long as we use generalized terms, it allows our client to really go to that place and deeply associate to that story. So like I said, what I want you to do now is just take 5 minutes to write a brief paragraph telling your client about them coming home, going to the kitchen, grabbing a lemon out of the fridge, cutting it in half, and finally bite into it, using as much VACOG as you can. And then when you're finished, move to the next exercise.